Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode Wounded Hero Burning Bright and True. This video is running slightly later than scheduled due to reasons which I will discuss later on in the video because it is something that does pertain to the immediate future of this channel. But between then and now, let's get on to the review and talk about the positives, all the things I enjoyed about this particular episode. And the headline positives for this episode is that I thought that it was filled with some really great action sequences with some fantastic animation to back that up. We had some brilliant character development moments with Endeavour, and we got to see a maturing of Bakugo. I'm going to start out by talking about the action sequences, as they are the more visceral aspects of the episode, which I think a lot of people are going to be talking about, particularly the stuff with All For One and then later with Tomura, and how those particular fights ended up evolving. I feel that both of the fights themselves are strong within their own right and are decently animated, though I will say is that I feel that the first fight between Endeavour and All For One, and as well as the other characters, is the strongest overall. I think the animation is better. I think it has greater emotional stakes behind it. This is not to discount and downplay the second one, because I think that it is good, but ultimately it does feel like more of your typical meat and potatoes action sequence for this kind of thing in a superhero action story. I will talk about the character development of Endeavour later on in this review, but it is something that does ultimately make that fight sequence between him and All For One as impactful as it is, as it ends up raising the emotional stakes between those two characters. For those of you who have been following my reviews for an extended period of time know that I don't like Endeavour as a person, though I do find their character fascinating, and that whole action sequence that we end up getting with him throwing himself into harm's way, throwing himself into disaster, I think helps to show just how much his character has evolved and changed over the course of the 18 months or so in which this story has been going on with. The first fight with all the stuff with the hero course characters and Hawks and All For One, I think is the better animated of the two action sequences. The stuff that, like I say, later on as far as Bakugo and the others concerned is good, just that this first action sequence, or series of action sequences I should say, feels a better animated and it feels less visually busy. I will say is that the second fight sequence did not feel too visually busy. I know there has been some speculation as to how I'll end up feeling about all the CGI fingers, but you know, it wasn't a massive problem for me. The big problem for me is that my internet tanked about midway through watching the episode, so it just made it look a lot more ugly than it ended up really being. I will say is I did really enjoy the second fight sequence for what it was. It does show a maturing of Bakugo, which itself we'll talk about in greater detail later. The big thing that always kind of bends my head when it comes to talking about action sequences and programs like this is there's only so many ways in which you can say the animation was good, it was paced well, the dynamism and the visual choreography of it was just fantastic, how it was all put together, the cinematography of it being great as what it was. I still think that we are still looking for that truly fantastic, breathtaking action sequence this season. Regrettably, I don't think we're there yet, but still what we got this week was good. Something that I really did like about that first action sequence though, or rather that first scene, was the idea of All For One's quirks rebelling against him. I just really love that idea. Coincidentally, I had an idea for a video on ways in which My Hero Academia could end, and regrettably, much like my idea for a video about who the UA traitor could be, I think I've left it a little bit too long to actually do it, though I still might do it for the sake of creativity, because you could always turn around and say, well, these are hypotheticals, these are what-ifs, these are things that people who have not known the future and how this all ends up ending could, you know, speculate on. And one of those ideas was effectively what we end up seeing in this episode, with All For One's quirks rebelling against him in the end. Basically, if you've ever seen Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, you kind of get the idea as to what will end up going there. I won't say too much on it just in case I do make a video on it, but still, I liked that whole visual. I liked how it all came together and just the implications of all of that. Though I will admit that it does ultimately feel like a momentary nerve, just like the equivalent of just him losing his footing ever so slightly and that opening him up. I think that the idea of that being the thing that ultimately thwarts him and ultimately defeats him would be thematically, or at least brilliant as regards to his character is concerned. He's supposed to be this mastermind that thinks several spaces ahead at all points, and just have something like this just come totally out of left field and catch him out in a, well, he didn't see that one coming, I think would be brilliant. Whether or not that will be the case in the grand scheme of things, I don't know, and I'm thinking it won't be, because they've already played their hand with this in the here and now. But we'll see as all that's concerned. The whole thing towards the end of the episode, though, or not towards the end of the episode, towards this end scene before the quarter, the end of this quarter, where we have All For One doing his bit of, he's still got one more trick up his sleeve. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how to feel about that, because I would have been perfectly fine had Endeavour being the one that ultimately thwarted him, or alternatively that if he did have one more thing up his sleeve, then it was a case of, oh, I don't even know what I'd end up suggesting as an alternative, because I don't think I'd come up with anything quite as interesting or potentially as cool as that. But it does leave us with this situation where All For One is going to be running around looking like beef jerky for the next few weeks or months, or how long it takes to finally put him down. Like, maybe it'll all turn out alright, but it does feel like a case of, okay, how do we take this to the next level? Because, as I mentioned in the previous video, you know that at the end of the day here, that any villains that get defeated in the here and now, if it's not a definitive them getting killed or getting locked up, they're going to get their second wind, they're going to get their second round of action, and that's what we're ultimately end up going to be getting here with All For One. He's going to have his second moment to shine, he's going to have his second attempt to take down our heroes. Our heroes aren't going to get the luxury of having the second breath, because that's how these things go in these narratives, but yeah, we'll see how it all rolls out. Like I say, I would have been perfectly fine had he just been defeated in the here and then, or he did some other thing apart from whatever it is that he's supposed to be doing now, which is something I will discuss when we get into negatives. We'll now move on to talk about Bakugo and his reflections in this episode. Now, I will admit that this is a part of the video, the part of the review that I've written the least for, because my internet cut out just before we got into that bit, and I just spent time writing about the other things to do with Endeavour and the action sequence, so forgive me if we go off the cuff a little bit here when we get a little bit waffly. I have to say is that I do like we ended up seeing here with Bakugo and his own personal growth. This is an episode which reflects that personal growth. We see in how he reflects back to where he was over the course of his adventure thus far. We see his evolution into becoming more of a mature young man, and him becoming more like the hero that he wishes he could have been as a child, rather than the petulant little turd that we've seen him up until most recently. This ends up helping to underline the fact that he is not just the screamy, shouty, explodey one, which certain parts of pop culture have boiled him down to, and that actually is a character here that's been growing and developing before our eyes, and that this is him becoming the kind of hero that he always wanted to be. He is not, despite certain people's interpretations, going to become the new Endeavour. I mean, he may be in the grand scheme of things as far as, you know, popularity and stuff is concerned once all this is wrapped up, but he's not going to be a character with the same kind of emotional and mental baggage that Endeavour has. He is going through his dark night of the soul right now, and he is hoping to come out the other end a better person. What will be left of him when all this is reflected, all wrapped up, who can say, but at least he will end up fighting whatever fight he can do as his truest and most purest self, without the baggage of being the horrible, nasty bully that he was before, that he's reflecting upon all the horrible, nasty things that he's done in his life thus far, particularly up until Izuku, and now he's realising now is the time for him to prove that he is really a hero, and undeniably a hero, and as is the way to things, as I mentioned previously, it doesn't quite go as planned, and he ends up getting one of his arms broken because we're only 10 episodes into this, so naturally he's not going to get some kind of big definitive blow on All For One, or I should say All For Tomura, but we are at a point in the story now where you know that anything that he ends up doing is only going to get him hurt. You know, it's obvious that he's not going to be the one to take down All For Tomura or Tomura, whichever one you want to call him. That's just an obvious way to things. It's just a case of, well, how knackered up is he going to get by that point? I will admit that he does feel a little bit bold to damage Bakugo so extremely so early on into all of this, bearing in mind that there's going to be another potentially season and a half of all this to go, but we'll soon see as to where all it goes. Hey, maybe he will also get his own second wind, and he'll get his big moment to cut some kind of massive blow onto what he was doing there. Another thing that I'll mention, and this is something that's not scripted, the little comic relief moment with the business class students recorded documentary. I don't know what to feel about that, but what I will say certainly in its favour is it was a good moment to help just break things out a little bit more. Not just for the sake of making it so that we're not going from action sequence to action sequence, but also the simple fact that it's giving us a closer look as to how the machinery of all this works, no pun intended, that we are seeing from the ground level, just how much of a strain all this fight is putting on with all of this. That this isn't quite turning out how everyone's planning, and now everyone having to effectively do the equivalent of double shifts just to make all this work. And I do like that fact, and there is something there about the joke of them making the documentary and then recording it for the sake of future history, or failing that future YouTube equivalent, HeroTube, or whatever they end up having. And there's a twisted part of me that does kind of like that as an idea, this moment where everything's going to hell, but you just have these kids from the business course recording it for the sake of YouTube and future documentaries. I kind of like that in a weird, twisted way. I think that's a neat little moment, and the more that I reflect upon it, the more I kind of end up liking it. To pivot into something more serious, I think it's time to talk about Endeavour and his own personal reflection, as I think that ultimately this makes for the big emotive core of this episode. The flashback sequence we get with him and his younger self confronting him is a really fantastically powerful moment, though it would be more accurate to say that his younger self isn't so much confronting him as much as his younger self is bollocking him for being such a self-absorbed good-for-nothing that was always more fixating on being the best rather than being the kind of hero that his father was, or All Might was. Sorry, it's very similar names. Anyway, as I was saying, is that whole sequence is made more powerful by the fact that it is entirely self-reflective. It wouldn't have worked as well had he be having a vision of another family member, had he had a vision of his wife or one of his children reaming him out for being such a selfish little bastard. I think that it being himself that is just talking about him and talking down to him is what makes it such a brilliant thing, and it ends up adding this parallel and this mirroring to what we end up seeing with Bakugo. Bakugo is a young man who's bollocking himself for being so immature when you'd expect a man of that age to be immature, whereas this younger version of Endeavour is bollocking Endeavour, the older Endeavour, for being immature even at his age. He's talking about him being this pathetic disappointment that couldn't bring it when it counted, and even now, even when everything's going to hell, he's still so tied up in his past ambitions that it's holding him back. And this ends up pivoting into that great little speech that Endeavour gives, where he's reflecting upon what he's gone through. He's reflecting upon this vision of his past and how he wants to do this now for future generations, doing it for his kids and for those who come next. This is him reaching that true moment of self-reflection, even if it comes through pain and sacrifice, and that only through pain and sacrifice can he ever cleanse his heart and mind of the torment that he has put himself and other people around him through. He has lived for nothing, and now he's going to die for something. He's throwing himself into harm's way in this epic final sacrifice. He knows at the end of the day, win, lose or draw, this is going to be his last great act as a hero. Even if he gets the win against All For One, he can never really be a hero again. As we've been hinted at over the past season and a half, something has broken in him and he can't be this number one hero anymore. He just doesn't have it in him anymore to do that. But if he can't be the number one hero, he will be the hero in the now. He will be the hero when it counted the most. So that is why he ultimately throws himself into this in the way that he does do, and just puts himself into direct harm's way. He knows that in doing this, there's a good chance he won't survive it, yet he still does that because that's what a hero does. And this is him acting like a hero, a true hero, for possibly the first time in this series. And I think that's a fantastically powerful moment. And as I've mentioned previously, I would be perfectly fine had, given the emotional weight of what we had seen, that he was the one that ultimately got some kind of win against All For One. That he was the one that got the final win against him, or at least broke him to the point where he wasn't going to be a threat for the foreseeable future. But regrettably, that ends up switching out to him getting caught out by All For Jerky and possibly having his quirk destroyed. It isn't totally clear due to the monologuing and the abstract visuals that we end up seeing, but you know, it is one of those really odd things that despite the fact that All For Jerky was cooked from the inside out, that somehow, somewhere upon his body, there was a quirk-destroying bullet tucked away somewhere that he appears to have used on Endeavour. I like the visual image of him growing the new ear and the eye. It feels a little bit odd to me, bearing in mind that All For One himself reflected upon the fact that, yeah, my senses have been destroyed and I'm having to use other quirks to see my way around, and that it is written out, underlined, that he doesn't have a regeneration quirk, that now he does? Or maybe he did have this stuff underneath him, but just the layers of burnt flesh from all the years of abuse, it just wasn't able to burn through, but now it can do, because all that, you know what, I'm not even getting into the biology of it, because it just feels a little bit gross. Anyway, to pivot into the negatives, I think that the bit towards the end with All For Jerky, or All For One, I think was a bit too ambiguous as to what comes next. Look, I get what they're doing here. It's not as though I don't understand what's happening here. I do get it. I don't need a clarification. But what I am saying is that I think it was a little bit too visually ambitious for its own good. Let's just put cards on the table here. It's setting up for round 2 with him. Yes, we've got another half of a year and a half until all of this boils out, until all of this is done. So we're not going to get any major villains being defeated in the here and now. We might get that towards the end of this season, but we're not going to get it at this point in it. At this point, it is just we knock down the villains and then they'll come back in a few episodes' time for the second big final confrontation. And it was going to be obviously that was going to be the case in the here and now. All For One was never going to end up getting defeated by Endeavour, even if from a certain point of view it feels like it would have been appropriate for that to happen. I have no issue with the fact that All For One is now up and about and is now going to start causing havoc, looking like one of those zombie things from the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I have no issue with that. My issue comes from the fact that it's just the stylistic flair that reveals that, oh, he's still alive, that I think is just a little bit too ambiguous, a little bit too abstract. In that moment when all that was happening, I was just thinking to myself, right, is All For One about to use a quirk? Is he about to decay Endeavour? Or has he taken trigger and now he's going to start going super mad crazy? Is he going to transfer his consciousness into a new body or into Endeavour? Is he going to end up becoming... he's going to kind of transfer his consciousness into a Nomu or something. Has he used a quirk-destroying bullet? Has he got Ares powers? Like, there's just so many questions as to what's happening in that here and now that we know that ultimately most of those things aren't the case, but given how it's all put together, just how it's all put together visually, it isn't clear. Now, to be fair, I do think that they're trying to do some kind of ambiguity here to make us question and go, oh crap, what's he doing? But there's a part of it that isn't sure as to whether it's intentionally ambiguous to make us freak out or unintentionally ambiguous because it's a little bit too creatively ambitious. I don't know, but I still say that the visuals in and of themselves are fine for what they are. So with that said, as we start to pivot into more of a general thought of things, let's get into the overview. And I think that this is a great, thrilling episode. I think that the best things about it are the deeper dives into the characters and developing those characters. I think the stuff with Endeavour was the strongest, but I will say the stuff with Bakugo was still great for what it was. There is a part of me, though, that wishes that the stuff with Bakugo was better built out, but ultimately it's just a reflection of the fact that it's just a runtime thing. And I will admit that the tech issues I've been having did get in the way of all of that, which I will discuss after we get through the next bit. As the next bit is going to be Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. Hopefully this video uploads in one piece. Oh dear. Anyway, time for Comment Corner. I'm going to keep this one quick. The comment comes from BigX1 from the previous video, which was a review of the season thus far. And they say, I enjoyed this season thus far, but I agree I wish the Star and Stripe and Traitor arc were longer. I know that's not the exact wording of that, but I'm very conscious on the fragility of my internet right now. But anyway, thank you for your comment. I have to say is I do agree. Well, you're agreeing with me, so naturally I'm good to agree with you. The Star and Stripe stuff is stuff that I think that its length is ultimately fine in the grand scheme of things, but the things with the Traitor arc, that should have been considered really long. I think that more should have been done to build that out. Certainly in the immediate term, as the truth of the matter is that everything connected to that arc has been put on ice now for the better part of 2.5 seasons. With all that said, let us just briefly address the elephant in the room here. I'm having tech issues at the moment. There's some kind of outage in my area, and I don't know when it's going to end up getting fixed. There's going to be an engineer coming in on Monday to investigate it all. At first, thought it was something to do with my internet, specifically my broadband box. It isn't. It is something that's happening in the area, so God only knows when that's going to get fixed. It might not get properly fixed out for a week, so I don't know when this video is landing. Hopefully it's landed more or less the same time as usual, but if there's any delays going forward, that's the reason why. Midway through watching this episode, the internet cut out. There's been times recently where it's cut out for 5 or 6 hours. Other times it's been running fine for about 12 hours non-stop, so hopefully things will be alright in the not too distant future. We'll soon see, but if there's any delay going forward, if there's any videos that don't go out till later, that's why. I've not suddenly thrown my hands up and given up on the series or anything like that, so you know how it goes. I'll probably put a message about on my computer, on my YouTube community thing, if I know things have been fixed, but we'll see and see about that. Anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!